I'd like to invite on stage now Professor Bari أنطونيو Costa-Pierce. يتفضل الآن البروفيسور باري أنطونيو Costa-Pierce وهو من هنري لاثام وجريس دوهرتي، أستاذ نظم أغذية المحيطات من جامعة إنجلاند الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، ليتحدث لنا عن التطورات التقنية الحيوية المهمة في الاستزراع المائي.
شكراً جزيلاً. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for this invitation. Today I'd like to talk about some important biotechnical advances that I've learned over the 40 years of being in aquaculture that may be important for you during my first visit with you in Saudi Arabia. And I am honored to be here today as a representative of a team directed by Dr. Mohammed Broom and the Al Mandoun Center, together with an international team he has kindly selected, to help him implement the Saudi vision for expanding inland aquaculture in your beautiful country. Many of my remarks today have to do with my participation in the FAO Global Conference on Aquaculture in Shanghai, China, that was to be held in person in 2020, but was held virtually. I'm going to follow this and recommend that you seek the international, regional, and other reviews that were done by over 2,000 global experts, including many countries from the GCC, made at this conference. I was one of the thematic leads, and I will choose some of the very important highlights for me and potentially for you as recommendations to the global community that were made at this conference. First of all, aquaculture is still very much of a pioneering enterprise, as we know, not only in your country, but in many of what I call the aquaculturally developing countries of the world. There's still many pioneering advances, and I would like to say, in being in the field for 40+ years, that during the career of the man speaking to you today, I witnessed the first farm shrimp, the first farm tilapia, and the first farm salmon during my career. So when you think about that, and you ponder the development of agriculture over the span of humanity, we still have a lot to learn. The only aquaculturally developed countries, from the policy down to the production, exist in Asia. And China dominates every global statistic. And so as you see, the real potentials for the growth of aquaculture are in places like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, among many of its partner countries. As you see, even in your region, aquaculture is dominated, production-wise, by a single country. And that is also in the Americas, dominated by a single country. In Europe, dominated by a single country, with vast areas able for new innovations and production. So during the Global Conference on Aquaculture, many of the repeating themes of the previous speakers and during this wonderful conference were repeated. And I would like to put some comments of note for the kingdom, for you as professionals, that were made on those stars today. I had the honor of being the co-theme leader on aquaculture's contribution to sustainable development goals, along with my colleague from the Stockholm Resilience Center, Dr. Max Stroll. And I'll make my comments about our findings at the end of my talk. So my talks are going to be primarily about genetics, and I have since about 30, 40 years of work on practical aspects with tilapia. I will feature my genetic talk about tilapia, but only as an example of how far we need to come with some of the other emerging species. I'll touch on some of what the previous speakers have mentioned on innovations in feed management, systems, and last of all, touch on markets. First on genetics. One of the primary aspects of humanity is that sometimes we not only eat with our taste buds, we eat with our eyes and we eat with our cultural backgrounds. And so for the tilapias, you can see a beautiful fish in front of you where we could mistake it for a marine fish, a red snapper. Notice it is not mottled with black spots. It is a pure red tilapia that performs as well as any marine or other fish. Some of the yellowtail growth rates that you've heard about in marine species. Over 14 generations of this marine tilapia now are grown in cages off of many countries. Particularly, I'm thinking about large commercial operations in South America. How did this evolve? And how far can we bring genetics through not only hybridization like in the past, but back to the old square one, which is bioprospecting. And I'd like to cover how much more we could do with the original genetics in bioprospecting. We all know of the advances of the World Fish Center, the advances that have been done in Alabasa with the giant and with the gift strains that have been spent worldwide. How did these evolve is very instructive, and also it's very instructive to see how the roles of the development of a synthetic species, being an evolutionary ecologist, one of the things that has been evolving in the biology of aquatic species is that we're evolving species as synthetic species, as hybrids that have evolved from their natal genetics. And we can't forget this. Tilapia is a very, very important part of this. And I go back to some of the experiments that were conducted in Thailand and then spread throughout the world, where when the 14 generations of the gift species were then released to the world, and now the Alabasa strain being promoted worldwide. At the same time, an interesting strain out of Thailand called the Chitralanda strain was performing just as well as some of these highly selectively bred species. And you are doing this in the kingdom now, assaying all of your tilapia existing in the kingdom, which is an absolutely essential baseline to know where you're at. But please look at this recent data from the high-level genetics. It shows very clearly why the Chitralandra strain performs just as well as the gift and the other Alabasa strain. It is a species, a hybrid, that incorporates as introgress genes into the synthetic strain, not only the hybrids of one species or many species, and then has been selected from that hybrid. So this caught my attention when we were looking at what were the mixtures for the development in regions like this region and part of the United States. Oreochromis mozambicus was imported post-World War II to many places in the world for various reasons. But when you look at what has been done, the sizes of the founder stocks, the movement of them, and the degradation of the species, and then the more alarming thing is development projects, mainly bilateral development projects between countries that would move some of these species that are highly mixed, highly introgress, back to Africa. Very, very dangerous for the future of all of aquaculture, is moving these manipulated genetics back to their natal homes. We can't forget some of the basics of where these species originate and some of the more brilliant publications that existed in the British Museum by Ethel Traves, who wrote the tome, the book, the species, the genera of Oreochromis, Danakila, and Saratharodon, and where did they come from? and how did they evolve out in the evolutionary ecology. So in our bioprospecting that was conducted during the gift of fish, to make that synthetic species out of the World Fish Center, we started here. We started, where is the top genetics for the Nile tilapia? And we found places like this. We found places in isolated pockets of Lake Victoria where Nile tilapia were routinely growing to 1.5 kilo and had the basal genetics from our assessment that were pure. We found also that many people were interested in the red tilapia, and all of the color variants that we tried to introgress into Nile tilapia all result from Oreochromis mozambicus. The red tilapia, all results from introgression of a recessive gene from Oreochromis mozambicus. And also look at mozambicus. It derives from an estuarine ancestor. It is present as far as 35 degrees south latitude. It is still in its natal state in some places. Some of our research showed that for mozambicus, if we were interested in evolving a synthetic strain of a red tilapia, we had to know about mozambicus. And we found that it was the most saline tolerant of all of the tilapias, that also, when salinity tolerance also incurred or developed cold tolerance in Oreochromis mozambicus. Cold tolerances and saline tolerances for species in freshwater are very, very important. But one of the things I wanted to emphasize is that these fishes were exported throughout the world and in some cases were just left. They were not manipulated by human beings. And so this is an isolated lake on the Mexican border in Southern California where Mozambicus was imported there in the 1940s for mosquito and weed control. It exists in its natal state outside of Africa as pure genetics, pure Oreochromis mozambicus, that could be used for the development of a red tilapia in that Mexican, South American bioregion. We can't forget about cold tolerance. And we know that during the recent drying since the Pleistocene of North Africa, we know that also there were lakes that connected the entire Sahel and the Sahara region, where there were, in the drying of Africa just recently, it created a disjunct distribution of the blue tilapias from the Levant, but all the way into West Africa. So for cold tolerance, we know that Oreochromis aureus has a cold-tolerant genes or recessive genes that are very important for introgression into a Niloticus, for example. There is a lake in Florida, USA, where Oreochromis aureus was imported again in the 1940s. It exists in a pure natal state outside of Africa in this lake as a potential bioresource for bioprospecting for people in that region. There could be others like this throughout the world where these species were imported pre-World War II, post-World War II. And then the most strange of them all, when an all-male tilapia was proposed in the 1960s to the world to mate a Oreochromis mozambicus times an Oreochromis Eurylepis ornorum, or Eurylepis, it was said that that cross of hybridization would produce 100% male tilapia, and that didn't happen because we still had uncontrolled reproduction. But we still don't know what is the benefit of growing the Wami River tilapia as natal genetics on its own, because it was mixed up right from the outset with another species. This idea of evolutionary ecology and the sourcing of proper founder stocks and mixing of the natal genetics in order to accomplish them, and using the genetic tools that we have today, we could only dream about when we were doing this. So I use that as an example to call to you for being very careful, and your geneticists know this, on the sizes of your founder stocks, the status of the stocks that are in the country, and how you can manipulate them or cannot manipulate them to meet your goals for the future. Or do you need to import more natal genetics and start afresh? Some comments about feeds and feeds management, and my colleague before me mentioned some very important things. First of all, again for tilapia, one of the things that always seems to be forgotten in first principles, that it is a lowland tropical fish that operates at 28 degrees Celsius as its optimal growing temperature. Many countries, such as the Kingdom, have a dual season. And so we're faced with a cold period of time. During that cold period of time, you will see that food conversion ratios become poorer, they become less efficient, and diseases can increase when it is posed for long term in non-optimal temperatures. So we can't forget some of the basic information for all of these species on growth optima and growth ranges based upon seasonalities outside of the warm, humid tropics. We also can't forget that there is optimal feeds and feed proteins, sizes and feed percentages, protein feed percentages for different size fishes. So we oftentimes think that when we've made a feed mill that it's done and we're thinking about grow out only. We're not thinking about specialty feeds as much. But I'd like to say for an economic development opportunity that the development of specialty juvenile and larval feeds and not only grow out feeds is an economically viable enterprise for new economic development. Lastly, we forget, I think, about feed management. We talk about efficiencies of feed use. One of the most stunning studies that we found was looking at the gut pH of tilapia over time and over seasons. And if the gut pH was high, that meant that the fish was it had no ability or less of an ability to actually assimilate the nutrients that we were giving it. So this was a first hint that there was a demonstrable cycle seasonally and daily of the gut pH of many fishes, and what did they really want at what time. And this was a stunning finding that came out in 2010 in a journal that many of us probably don't read, a comparative biochemistry and physiology journal. Found that most of the feeding was nocturnal, and that 93% of the daily food demands occurred at night. And indeed, feed inefficiency for this particular species was most inefficient during the day. We are daily species with a diurnal cycle as human beings, and we oftentimes do our management of feeds during the day. Is that the proper time to feed our fish? A little bit about the evolutions of feeds. We all know that we're now somewhere near stage 3 and 4 on this slide, that we've gone through the era of what some people talked about, the overuse of fish meal and fish oil, or some people would say farming up marine food webs, actually overtaking fish meal and fish oil from the ocean and using that to feed aquaculture species. And then stage 2 is when we move to terrestrial proteins, plant meals and plant oils. And as one of the previous speakers pointed out, the Amazon deforestation by soybeans started to occur. Norwegian salmon farmers started saying that they were going to put a moratorium on any soybeans harvested that clearly came from the Amazon, of some of the savanna systems that were being destroyed in Argentina and Brazil, not by only soybean demand for terrestrial animals, but then aquaculture was being blamed for contributing to that. And so kudos to the aquaculture development research community. It started talking about full use of anything that we took from the ocean. So countries like Iceland put on a national regulation. Everything that was being caught in the ocean must be landed. No bycatch, and to put in some tax and other incentives for fishing vessels to land all bycatch. And what did that result? The result of that was one of the most viable fish meal, high protein, high quality fish meal industries in the world today in that country. The EU put a regulation on that for all managed fisheries, unfortunately it didn't account for all fisheries, must land all their bycatch. So then that stimulated the circular bioeconomy, where now in Norway, for example, the country and industries there earn more money on the byproducts than the fillets. So all former wastes are now considered resources for innovation. So the circular bioeconomy has stimulated an innovation economy that we could only dream about 20 years ago. And then the biotechnology revolution. Some of this has been mentioned. I won't mention all of the wonderful things in insects that are going on. I'd like to feature the single-cell protein and the more controversial ones, the GMOs. First of all, my friend Margaret Overland from the Norwegian University of Life Sciences was one of the first people to actually take wood chips and to grow yeast on them. And this was not in a test tube. This was producing large amounts of yeast off of waste wood and then use that yeast in formulations, feed formulations for farm salmon, and proved that the yeast protein produced less gastric disturbances than soy protein and had just as high a food conversion ratio, just as a low food conversion ratio and higher growth rate. So yeasts now from wastes. Second of all, we've talked a lot about algae. And obviously, algae can be much more productive of oils than any other land-based plant oil crop. What's wonderful about this is not a dream anymore. So large companies now are producing marine algae oils that are being formulated into fish feeds. And some of them are so large that they are predicting they are 1/3 to 1/2 the size of a conventional fish meal factory that harvests fish from the ocean. As you can see, some of these products use agricultural sugars for the fermentation, giving knock-on effects to sugar beet farmers in that region. I'm very keen on bacteria. This new company, which many of you have heard about, which actually is receiving a large amount of investment money for the innovation economy in the EU, Costa, is using methane from landfills, mainly landfill off-gassing methane or methane from other sources to grow a Methanococcus bacteria, very high protein bacteria. Again, not in theory, beyond the laboratory, all being produced for fish feeds, formulated into fish feeds, not using any fish meal or fish oil, producing, again, at a factory, plant factory level, at the level of a fish meal factory. And then, more controversial in some countries, such as the EU, less controversial in other countries. So the seed oil plants, such as I feature here, the brassicas and the camellia, they produce for society right now short-chain fatty acids. Scientists in the UK and in Australia have taken the genes from marine algae and put them into these plants, and miraculously they produce fish oil. They produce oil with the DHA and EPA content, the long-chain fatty acids, that is comparable to any fish oil. So these long-chain fatty acids now have been put into fish feeds, and they perform just as well as fish oil. In your country, you have the opportunity to look at processings like this because of your very high industrial knowledge and processing knowledge that comes from your oil and gas industry. As the knowledge, one of the things I would like to point out that impresses me about even being in the kingdom for a few days, you're very similar to Norway in one way, is that there has been a very large investment or future investment or thought by the oil and gas industry to move into food production very strongly. As we get the attention of those producers, we have a real chance to compete with to make large-scale production advances. Systems, a couple of very quick examples on systems. Again, my colleagues have mentioned aquaponics, but I would like to feature what I saw with my own eyes in China in 2019, the evolution of aquavoltaics. We all know that solar energy, particularly in a place like Saudi Arabia, we all know that large-scale commercial solar for hot water could produce the kinds of water that we need to ameliorate the low temperatures during the cool season. We know that that would save tremendous amounts of groundwater for temperature control during those times of the year that some of the Saudi farmers do currently. So that's number one. A very, what we call low-hanging fruit, is large-scale solar, commercial solar for hot water production, together with aquaculture. But this is nothing short of spectacular, which is going on tops of reservoirs with fish farming in China right now. Large 120, 200 megawatt solar energy, PV, both PV existing as well as thin film PVs, together with aquaculture. There's a knockoff of this called agrivoltaics. You can well imagine evapotranspiration rates are down, water conservation rates are down, you can create lanes for harvesting. This could change the very face. The merger of renewable energy systems together with large-scale commercial aquaculture could change the very face of the future of aquaculture. And then large-scale commercial aquaponics. Again, my comments to you today are not theory in the laboratory or small scale. They're all commercially viable systems. This one in the United States has caught the world's attention because it produces, every 1 kilogram of feed produces over 11 kilograms of human food. So let me walk you through this. The plants are unfed. There's about 5, as you can see, 1.1 hectares of plants. And the production of plants is only driven as the excess nutrients of the fish wastes. However, it's this new concept of discontinuous aquaponics, balancing the nutrients, because we know the N to P ratio is out of whack. It's too high for the leafy greens in this particular case. So it has to be balanced with phosphorus and trace elements. And when you get that mix, you involve plant physiologists together with aquaculture, this is the potential. Now look at I just decided to put other productive aquaculture ecosystems on the Earth, on the face of the Earth together with it. And you can see, even in a productive North Atlantic or South African estuary, these food production systems can change the very face of food production on Earth if we are smart and design them well. Lastly, some quick markets, because I spend time, obviously, a lot of time with farmers. And I think a lot about the rural development situation and how that fits small scale with large scale. And particularly with tilapia, because it is one of I call the big three: shrimp, salmon, tilapia, the big three that have made it in my lifetime. There are, again, with different cultures. If color is important, then we're thinking about whole fish. If color is not important, maybe we're thinking about cutting and value added and packaging. Here is, as you can see, in a culture, particularly the UK in this case, the UK, where color is very important for whole fish, for the consumer, very high price, and this is the form that likely will get the most market attention for tourists. Tourism was a big part of your economy. It's a big part of the world's economy. And the color to tourists, mainly high-end, they want to see a red fish. And that may be very important as you do your market surveys. But then for others, you may be cutting. But you need a scale of production in order to move into the high operating costs for processing. Plus, processing involves a lot of issues about labor and who wants to work on those jobs. But very clearly, what we've seen is the advent of, again, if it's not whole fish, of cutting fish, the benefits of developing the packaging. Quick meals for the people who are in the kitchen, who are very, very busy, and they're cooking for a family. This is what they want to see. They want to cook these packages of fish if they eat fish, and they want to do it just as we do chicken. We have to get tilapia and species like it back to what we said 20 years ago, the development of the aquatic chicken, and compete with chicken. Lastly, just some comments to end, please, on the Sustainable Development Goals, as one of the previous speakers so articulately spoke about. This was our panel on the aquaculture's contributions to the SDGs. I had the honor of joining with some of your colleagues here who you know very well, such as Sunil Estid, the director of the Institute of Aquaculture at the University of Stirling, among others. And one of the things that we saw very clearly when we looked at some species, that we had crossed a bridge with a species in many parts of the world with the consumers about branding, and particularly about engaging young people. These were the messages that the world's youth want to see. They want to see people of my age supporting this movement towards the world's most sustainable foods. They want to see now their grandparents, which I am now, of this generation. They want to see us supporting this portfolio. Not only development, but development with sustainable development in mind. So lastly, on the rural development side, what we constantly forget about, and one of the previous speakers was articulate in this, is that we forget about the jobs and the economic ecosystem that production provides. The social, cultural, and societal benefits of aquaculture as rural development are very clear in many other parts of the world. I can bring you to my rural area, which is less than 1 person per square kilometer, where salmon farming has done this. It has provided jobs, income, and economic viability to poor families that just didn't have very many opportunities. And where were their children going? To the cities. And the parents were getting more and more angry about that movement of their children. So thank you so much. Shukran, gazilan, for your friendship and hospitality. It's a great honor to be with you.
Thank you indeed, Professor Bari.